Laura Bennett was a woman who liked things to be simple. She lived in Oak Ridge, a small town in the Midwest where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. Laura taught biology at the local high school, and she loved her job. Her students weren't always the most enthusiastic about science, but she enjoyed finding ways to make even the driest topics interesting. Her husband Ryan worked as a mechanic at his own garage just outside of town. He was a practical man with calloused hands and a quick smile. Together, they had built a quiet, happy life. But lately, something felt off. It wasn't one big thing, it was lots of little things adding up. At first, Laura noticed it with her students. A few of them started coming to class looking tired all the time. Then there were complaints about headaches or dizziness. One girl, Sophie, mentioned that her hair had been falling out in clumps. Another boy, Ethan, showed her a patch of skin on his arm that had turned an odd shade of grayish-green. Laura tried not to jump to conclusions. Teenagers were prone to stress, poor diets, and strange fads. Still, something about these symptoms gnawed at her. Ryan didn't seem worried when she mentioned it over dinner. "Kids today are glued to their phones," he said, shrugging. "They probably just need more sleep." Laura nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. She decided to pay closer attention. Over the next week, she asked her students casual questions during class. How were they sleeping? Were they eating well? Did anyone else notice changes in their bodies? To her surprise, several hands went up. Some admitted to feeling unusually weak, while others described rashes or unexplained bruising. Even Sophie's best friend, Mia, confessed that her nails had become brittle and cracked easily. Laura knew she needed answers. After school one Friday, she stopped by the nurse's office to see if any of the kids had visited recently. The nurse, a kind woman named Mrs. Harper, confirmed that yes, there had been an uptick in visits for fatigue, nausea, and skin issues. "I thought maybe it was flu season coming early," Mrs. Harper said, frowning. "But none of the usual. Treatments seemed to help." That night, Laura sat at the kitchen table grading papers, her mind racing. Something wasn't right. Whatever was happening, it wasn't normal, and it wasn't limited to teenagers. Earlier that day, she'd overheard two teachers talking about similar problems. One complained of constant migraines, and the other said her vision had become blurry. Laura glanced at Ryan, who was tinkering with a broken toaster on the counter. He looked fine, healthy as ever, but she wondered how long that would last. Her thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. It was Daniel Carter, an old friend from college. Daniel had moved away years ago to work at a research lab in Chicago. They hadn't spoken in months, so his call came as a surprise. "Hey, Laura," he began, his tone unusually serious. "I heard about what's going on in Oak Ridge." Laura froze. "What do you mean?" she asked, though her stomach already felt tight with dread. "There have been reports," Daniel explained, "not just in your town, across the country. People are experiencing weird symptoms: hair loss, skin discoloration, muscle weakness. No one knows why yet, but I think it might be connected to genetics." Laura leaned forward, gripping the phone tightly. "Connected how?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't want to scare you, but we've seen cases where people's DNA appears to be changing. Not in a good way. There are anomalies showing up in sequences that shouldn't exist naturally." The words hit Laura like a punch to the gut. She forced herself to stay calm. "Do you think it's some kind of disease? Or pollution?" "I'm not sure," Daniel admitted. "But whatever it is, it's spreading fast. And it's not just humans. Animals are acting strangely too. Crops are failing. Even the soil composition is shifting in ways we can't explain." For a moment, Laura couldn't speak. Her mind raced through everything she'd observed in the past few weeks. Could it really be true? Was there something fundamentally wrong with human biology? Finally, she found her voice. "Can I send you some samples? Maybe run tests on my students?" Daniel agreed, cautioning her to be discreet. "If word gets out, people will panic. Just collect what you can and ship it to me. I'll see what I can find." Over the weekend, Laura gathered blood samples from a handful of volunteers, explaining it as part of a routine health screening. She packaged them carefully and sent them off to Daniel's lab on Monday morning. For the next few days, she waited anxiously, trying to focus on her lessons and household chores. But every time she saw one of her students scratching at a rash or yawning uncontrollably, her worry grew. When Daniel finally called back, his voice was grave. "You were right to be concerned," he said. "The samples show clear signs of genetic mutation. It's subtle, but it's there. Their DNA is rewriting itself in ways that shouldn't be possible." Laura felt a chill run down her spine. "Is it dangerous?" "I don't know yet," Daniel replied. "But based on what I've seen, it could get worse before it gets better. You need to keep an eye on them. And yourself." That evening, Laura shared the news with Ryan. She expected him to dismiss it as paranoia, but instead, he listened quietly, his brow furrowed. "Do you think it's affecting me too?" he asked after a pause. Laura hesitated. "I don't know. Have you noticed anything unusual?" Ryan shook his head, but the next morning he spilled coffee on the kitchen counter because his hands were shaking. Later that afternoon, he forgot to pick up parts for a customer's car, a mistake he never would have made before. When he confided in Laura that night, she suggested testing him as well. Reluctantly, he agreed. The results came back worse than she'd feared. Ryan's cells were deteriorating rapidly, almost as if his body was attacking itself. Laura stared at the data, tears blurring her vision. This wasn't just a mystery anymore, it was personal. Whatever was happening, it was threatening everything she held dear. Determined to find answers, Laura reached out to Daniel again. Through him, she learned of Dr. Evelyn Monroe, a leading biologist who specialized in genetic disorders. Daniel arranged a meeting, warning Laura that Evelyn might not be eager to talk. "She works for the government," he said, "and they don't like bad press." Despite her nerves, Laura drove to Chicago the following week. The city felt overwhelming. Compared to Oak Ridge, its streets crowded and noisy. When she arrived at Evelyn's office, the scientist greeted her with a guarded expression. Laura explained what she'd discovered, showing her the test results and describing the symptoms she'd witnessed firsthand. Evelyn listened intently, her sharp eyes scanning the documents Laura had brought. When Laura finished, the older woman sighed deeply. "This isn't the first time I've heard of something like this," she admitted. "Years ago, there were experiments, classified projects aimed at enhancing human resilience. The goal was to prepare us for extreme environments like space colonization. But something went wrong. The compounds they used, they destabilized DNA instead of improving it." Laura's heart sank. "Are you saying this is man-made?" Evelyn nodded grimly. "It's possible. If traces of those compounds entered the environment, they could still be affecting people today. We thought we contained it, but clearly we were wrong." As Laura left the office, her mind swirled with questions. Who was responsible? Why had no one warned the public? And most importantly, could anything be done to stop it? Back in Oak Ridge, she resolved to fight for the truth. Not just for her students, not just for Ryan, but for everyone whose lives were being turned upside down by forces beyond their control. Laura returned to Oak Ridge feeling both overwhelmed and determined. The conversation with Dr. Evelyn Monroe had given her more questions than answers, but it also confirmed one thing. Whatever was happening wasn't natural. It was the result of human actions, actions that had gone horribly wrong. Laura knew she couldn't sit back and wait for someone else to fix it. She needed to dig deeper, to uncover the truth, no matter how hard it might be. The first person she turned to was Daniel Carter. He had always been a reliable friend, and now he was one of the few people she could trust. When she called him, his voice was calm but serious. "I've been looking into what you told me," he said, "and I think I've found something important. There's an old research facility in Montana where some of those experiments were conducted. If we want answers, that's where we need to go." Laura hesitated. A trip like that would mean leaving Ryan behind, and the thought of being away from him while his condition worsened made her stomach churn. But she also knew she couldn't ignore this lead. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it, but we'll have to be careful." Before they left, Laura decided to talk to a few others in town who might have noticed strange things happening. She started with Emma Lewis, a young mother whose toddler had developed translucent patches on his skin. Emma lived in a small apartment near the edge of town, and when Laura arrived, she looked exhausted. Her son Tommy sat quietly on the floor, staring at a toy car without touching it. "I don't know what's wrong with him," Emma said, tears welling up in her eyes. "At first I thought it was just eczema or something, but then these patches appeared. And he's so tired all the time, he barely eats anymore." Laura nodded sympathetically. "Emma, I think Tommy might be part of something bigger, something affecting a lot of people. Have you noticed anything else unusual?" Emma hesitated before answering. "Well, there is one thing. Last week I went out to the garden to pick some tomatoes, and they were shriveled and black. I've never seen anything like it. And the chickens, they've stopped laying eggs completely." Laura thanked Emma and promised to keep her updated. Next, she visited Jake Miller, a farmer, who owned a large plot of land outside of town. Jake greeted her with a weary smile. His usually tidy farm looked neglected, with overgrown fields and a barn door hanging crookedly on its hinges. "Something's wrong with my cows," Jake said as he led Laura to the pasture. "They're producing milk, but it's making people sick. 2 of my neighbors got violently ill after drinking it. And the crops? They're dying, Laura. Corn, wheat, even the grass. It's all turning yellow and brittle." Jake's words sent a chill down Laura's spine. Whatever was affecting humans wasn't isolated. It was spreading, seeping into the soil, the plants, the animals. The scale of the problem was far greater than she'd imagined. When Laura met up with Daniel the next morning, she shared everything she'd learned. He listened intently, taking notes. "It sounds like whatever caused these mutations isn't just targeting humans," he said. "It's altering ecosystems too. That's why we need to get to Montana. If we can find records from those experiments, maybe we can figure out how to stop this." They set out early the next day, driving west toward Montana. The journey took hours, and the landscape gradually shifted from rolling hills to rugged mountains. Along the way, they passed through small towns and empty stretches of highway, each one quieter than the last. At one point, they stopped at a gas station where a man sitting on a bench muttered about birds falling from the sky. Laura exchanged a glance with Daniel, but didn't say anything. By late afternoon, they reached the research facility. It was tucked deep in the woods, surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. The building itself looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in moss. But as they approached, Laura noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt driveway. "We're not the only ones here," Daniel whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for the pocket knife he carried. Cautiously, they stepped inside. The air smelled musty, and the floor creaked under their feet. Files and papers littered the desks as if the scientists who worked there had left in a hurry. Laura began sifting through the documents, her heart pounding. Most of it was technical jargon she didn't fully understand, but one file caught her eye. It detailed the development of synthetic compounds designed to enhance human resilience. According to the notes, the compounds were supposed to adapt to extreme environments, making humans capable of surviving in places like Mars. But something had gone wrong during testing. Subjects exposed to the compounds began showing signs of cellular breakdown, and the project was shut down. "This is it," Laura said, holding up the file. "This is what's causing all of this." Just then, they heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. Before they could react, 3 men in dark uniforms burst into the room, weapons drawn. "Drop the files," one of them ordered, his voice cold and authoritative. Daniel raised his hand slowly, but Laura clutched the file tighter. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "That's none of your concern," the man replied. "Hand over the documents or we'll take them by force." Laura hesitated, her mind racing. These men weren't here to help. They were here to cover up the truth. She glanced at Daniel, who gave her a subtle nod. Without warning, he lunged at the nearest guard, knocking him off balance. Chaos erupted as the other 2 men shouted and struggled to regain control. In the confusion, Laura slipped out of the room, clutching the file tightly to her chest. She ran through the corridors, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her she could hear shouting and the sound of pursuit. Finally, she reached a side door and pushed it open, stumbling into the forest. Branches whipped at her face as she sprinted blindly, her only thought to put as much distance between herself and the facility as possible. After what felt like hours, she collapsed against a tree, her legs burning with exhaustion. She opened the file again, scanning the pages frantically. Buried in the technical details was a section labeled Containment Protocols. It outlined steps to neutralize the compounds, though the language was vague and incomplete. Still, it was a start, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. As night fell, Laura realized she was alone. Daniel hadn't followed her, and she feared the worst. Tears streamed down her face as she thought about him, about Ryan, about everyone back in Oak Ridge depending on her to make things right. But she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when she was so close to finding answers. With renewed determination, Laura stood up and began walking. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing for certain: she would expose the truth no matter the cost. Laura walked through the dark forest, her mind racing with fear and determination. The file in her hands felt heavier with each step, not because of its physical weight, but because of the secrets it held. She knew she couldn't stop now. Whatever was happening to people like Ryan, Emma's son Tommy, and Jake's cows wasn't just an accident. It was the result of experiments gone wrong. Someone had to take responsibility, and if no one else would do it, Laura decided she would. The night was cold and the trees loomed tall around her, their branches swaying in the wind. Every sound made her jump, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but she kept moving. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get as far away from the research facility as possible. After hours of walking, she finally stumbled upon a narrow dirt road. Exhausted, she sat down on the edge of the road, clutching the file tightly. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel. Had he escaped, or had those men caught him? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't afford to fall apart now. Eventually, a truck approached, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Laura stood up and waved her arms, hoping the driver would stop. When the truck slowed down, she saw it was driven by an older man with a kind face and a baseball cap. "You look like you've been through something," he said, eyeing her disheveled appearance. "I need help," Laura said quickly. "I'm trying to get back to Oak Ridge." The man nodded. "Hop in, I'm heading that way anyway." As they drove, Laura debated how much to tell him. In the end, she decided to keep it simple. "There's something bad happening in my town," she said. "People are getting sick, and I think I know why. But some people don't want me to talk about." The man frowned. "Sounds serious. You be careful, miss. The world's full of folks who don't like the truth getting out." When they reached Oak Ridge early the next morning, Laura thanked the man and hurried home. Ryan was asleep on the couch, his face pale and drawn. Seeing him like that broke her heart, but it also strengthened her resolve. She gently woke him and explained what had happened at the research facility. "I found proof," she told him, showing him the file. "This is what's causing all of this. We have to tell people." Ryan nodded weakly. "Do what you have to do," he said. "Just promise me you'll be safe." Laura spent the next few days reaching out to everyone she could trust. She started with Emma and Jake, explaining what she'd learned and urging them to spread the word. Then she contacted local reporters, sharing the documents and asking them to investigate further. At first, many were skeptical, but when Laura showed them the evidence and pointed out the growing number of people experiencing strange symptoms, they began to take her seriously. Word spread quickly, and soon the entire town was buzzing with talk of the mysterious illness. People gathered in the park to discuss what was happening, sharing stories and fears. Some were angry, demanding answers from the government. Others were scared, unsure of what the future held. Laura stood in front of the crowd, holding the file in her hands. "We can't ignore this anymore," she said. "Whatever is happening to us isn't natural. It's the result of experiments done years ago, experiments that went wrong. But we can fight back. We can demand justice. Her words inspired others to join her cause. Together they organized protests, holding signs that read, "What did they do to us?" and "Truth over secrets." The movement grew beyond Oak Ridge, spreading to neighboring towns and cities. People across the country began sharing their own experiences, connecting the dots between seemingly unrelated cases of illness and environmental changes. But not everyone was supportive. Powerful corporations and government officials tried to silence the growing outcry. Anonymous threats appeared online, warning Laura and her supporters to back off. One night, someone threw a brick through her living room window, shattering the glass. Despite the danger, Laura refused to give up. She installed extra locks on the doors and slept with a flashlight by her bed, but she continued to speak out. Meanwhile, Daniel's fate remained unknown. Laura often wondered if he was still alive, if he had managed to escape the men at the research facility. She searched for news about him but found nothing. It was as if he had vanished without a trace. The thought haunted her, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. One evening, as she was preparing for another meeting, there was a knock at her door. She opened it cautiously, half expecting trouble. Instead, she found a young woman standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Are you Laura Bennett?" the woman asked. "Yes," Laura replied. "Who are you?" "My name is Claire," the woman said. "I worked at the facility in Montana. I helped Daniel escape, but he didn't make it." Laura felt her knees go weak. Tears filled her eyes, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Tell me what happened," she said softly. Claire hesitated before speaking. "After you ran, Daniel distracted the guards so you could get away. He fought them, but there were too many. They shot him." Her voice cracked, and she wiped her eyes. "Before he died, he told me to find you. He said you're the only one who can stop this." Laura sank onto the couch, her mind reeling. Daniel had given his life to protect her, to ensure she could expose the truth. She owed it to him, and to everyone else, to keep fighting. Over the next few weeks, Claire became an invaluable ally. She provided detailed information about the experiments conducted at the facility, including names of scientists and corporate executives involved. With Claire's help, Laura pieced together a clearer picture of what had happened. The synthetic compounds designed to enhance human resilience had been released into the environment accidentally, contaminating soil, water, and air. Over time, the compounds had spread, affecting plants, animals, and humans alike. Armed with this knowledge, Laura took her case to national media outlets. Journalists from major newspapers and TV networks came to Oak Ridge to interview her and others affected by the crisis. The story gained widespread attention, sparking outrage and demands for accountability. Protesters marched in cities across the country, holding vigils for those who had fallen ill or died. Scientists joined the movement, calling for immediate action to address the damage caused by the rogue compounds. In response, the government announced an investigation into the matter. A team of independent researchers was assembled to study the effects of the compounds and develop potential treatments. Progress was slow, and many doubted whether a solution could be found in time to save those already suffering. Still, the fact that authorities were finally taking action gave people hope. Through it all, Laura remained at the center of the storm. She spoke at rallies, wrote articles, and appeared on television, using every opportunity to raise awareness. Her efforts earned her both praise and criticism. Some called her a hero, while others accused her of exaggerating the problem for personal gain. But Laura didn't care about the opinions of critics. All that mattered to her was making sure the truth came out. As the weeks turned into months, Laura noticed subtle changes in Ryan's condition. His tremors worsened and he struggled to walk without assistance. Yet despite his declining health, he never complained. Instead, he encouraged Laura to keep going, reminding her that their fight was bigger than either of them. "You're doing the right thing," he told her one evening as they sat together on the porch. "No matter what happens to me, don't stop." Laura squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I won't," she promised. "I'll see this through to the end, By the time winter arrived, the movement had grown into a global phenomenon. Countries around the world began investigating similar cases of unexplained illnesses and environmental degradation. Scientists collaborated on finding ways to neutralize the compounds, though progress remained frustratingly slow. Meanwhile, lawsuits were filed against the corporations and individuals responsible for the original experiments, seeking justice for those harmed by their actions. Despite the challenges, Laura refused to lose hope. She had seen firsthand the resilience of ordinary people coming together to demand change. And while the road ahead was uncertain, she believed that humanity's strength lay in its ability to adapt and overcome, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. As snow began to fall over Oak Ridge, Laura stood outside her house, looking out at the quiet streets. The town had changed since the beginning of all this, but it was still home. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, and Laura smiled faintly. Life went on, fragile yet determined, carrying within it the seeds of renewal. Winter deepened in Oak Ridge, wrapping the town in a blanket of snow. The cold air bit at Laura's cheeks as she walked through the quiet streets, her breath visible in small clouds. Despite the frosty weather, there was a sense of hope in the air, a fragile but growing belief that things could get better. People had started to come together in ways they never had before. Neighbors helped each other clear driveways, shared food with families struggling to make ends meet, and held candlelight vigils for those who were sick or had passed away. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Laura carried the weight of everything on her shoulders, but she also felt lighter somehow. Knowing that others were standing beside her made the burden easier to bear. She spent her days coordinating efforts with scientists, activists, and community leaders, while her nights were filled with long conversations with Ryan. His condition continued to worsen, but he remained steadfast, always reminding her why their fight mattered. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ryan turned to her. "You've done so much already," he said softly. "But this isn't just about us anymore, it's about everyone. About making sure no one else has to go through what we're going through." Laura nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know," she whispered. "But I'm scared, Ryan. What if we can't fix it? What if it's too late?" Ryan reached out and took her hand. "Then we'll face that when it comes. But right now you're giving people hope. That's worth more than anything." The next morning, Laura received a call from Claire. She sounded excited, almost giddy. "They've found something," she said. "A team of researchers in Germany thinks they might have a way to counteract the compounds. They're calling it a neutralizer. It's not a cure, but it could slow down the damage and give our bodies a chance to heal." Laura's heart leapt. For months, they'd been searching for answers, and now finally, there was a glimmer of progress. "When will we know more?" she asked. "Soon," Claire replied. "They're running tests now. If it works, they'll share the formula worldwide." Over the following weeks, news of the potential breakthrough spread like wildfire. Scientists worked tirelessly, testing the neutralizer on plants, animals, and eventually humans. Early results were promising. Crops began to grow again. Animals regained their strength, and some patients showed signs of improvement. It wasn't a miracle cure, it couldn't undo all the damage, but it offered a lifeline to those still suffering. In Oak Ridge, the first shipments of the neutralizer arrived in early spring. Volunteers set up a makeshift clinic in the high school gymnasium, where doctors administered treatments to anyone willing to try them. Emma brought Tommy, whose translucent skin patches had faded slightly after just one dose. Jake reported that his cow's milk was safe to drink again, and his fields were showing signs of recovery. Even Ryan seemed a little stronger, though the changes were subtle. Despite these small victories, Laura knew the battle wasn't over. The neutralizer was only a temporary solution. To truly fix the problem, they needed to address the root cause, the reckless experiments that had unleashed the compounds in the first place. She continued to push for accountability, demanding that corporations and governments take responsibility for their actions. Lawsuits dragged on, and debates raged in courts and legislatures around the world. Some argued that punishing those responsible would do nothing to help the victims, while others insisted justice was necessary to prevent future disasters. Through it all, Laura became a symbol of resilience. Her story inspired countless others to speak out, not just about the biological crisis but about broader issues affecting humanity. Environmental groups used the opportunity to highlight the dangers of unchecked industrial practices. Advocacy organizations called for stricter regulations on scientific research. Slowly but surely, change began to take root. As summer approached, Oak Ridge transformed once again. Flowers bloomed in gardens, children played outside, and laughter echoed through the streets. Life wasn't back to normal. It might never be. But there was a renewed sense of purpose. People cared for one another in ways they hadn't before, recognizing that their survival depended on unity and cooperation. One sunny afternoon, Laura stood atop a hill overlooking the town. Below her, researchers set up a new laboratory dedicated to studying the effects of the compounds and developing long-term solutions. It was a modest building, nothing fancy, but it represented hope, a commitment to learning from past mistakes, and building a better future. Behind her, Emma approached, holding Tommy's hand. The boy looked healthier than he had in months, his cheeks rosy and his eyes bright. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "None of this would have happened without you." Laura shook her head. "It wasn't just me, it was all of us. We did this together." Emma smiled, then turned to leave, calling Tommy along with her. As they walked away, Laura noticed Ryan watching her from a distance. He leaned heavily on a cane, but he was smiling. She walked over to him, linking her arm through his. "How are you feeling today?" she asked. "Better," he admitted. "Not great, but better." They stood there for a moment, side by side, taking in the view. "Do you think we'll ever really understand what went wrong?" Ryan asked after a while. Laura thought about it. "Maybe not completely, but I think we'll learn enough to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's what matters." Ryan nodded. "And what happens if it does?" "We'll figure it out," Laura said firmly. "We always do." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Laura felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges and uncertainties. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that humanity could rise above its flaws, that even in the face of unimaginable odds, people could find a way to heal and rebuild. Later that night, as she tucked herself into bed, Laura opened the file she had carried for so long. Its pages were worn and dog-eared, marked with notes and highlights. She flipped through it one last time, remembering everything it had cost to get here. The sacrifices, the losses, the moments of doubt. Then she closed it and placed it gently on her bedside table. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new questions, and new opportunities to make a difference. But for now, Laura let herself rest, knowing that she and everyone else had taken the first steps toward a brighter tomorrow. The months that followed were a mix of progress and setbacks. The neutralizer had given people hope, but it wasn't a permanent fix. While it slowed the damage caused by the rogue compounds, it couldn't fully reverse the changes already happening in human bodies, plants, and animals. Scientists warned that long-term solutions would take years to develop, if they could be developed at all. In the meantime, communities like Oak Ridge had to adapt to a new reality. Laura threw herself into the work of helping her town recover. She spent her days coordinating with researchers, organizing support groups for those affected, and educating people about how to live alongside the lingering effects of the crisis. Her nights were quieter now, filled with moments of reflection as she sat by the fire with Ryan. His health continued to decline, but he remained determined to stay positive. "We've come this far," he often said. "That's something to be proud of." Despite his optimism, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, for Ryan, for others, and for the planet itself. The environmental damage caused by the compounds was proving harder to repair than anyone had anticipated. Forests struggled to regrow, rivers carried traces of toxins, and wildlife populations remained dangerously low. It was clear that humanity's mistakes wouldn't disappear overnight. One morning, Laura received an unexpected visit from Dr. Evelyn Monroe, the biologist she'd met months earlier. Evelyn had been working closely with international teams to study the compounds and their effects. She looked tired but resolute as she stepped onto Laura's porch. "I need your help," she said without preamble. Laura invited her inside, curiosity overriding her initial surprise. Over coffee, Evelyn explained that governments and corporations were starting to lose interest in finding a permanent solution. "They see the neutralizer as good enough," Evelyn said bitterly. "As long as people aren't dying immediately. They don't care about the long-term consequences, but we both know this isn't over." Laura nodded grimly. She'd seen signs of complacency herself. Politicians shifting focus to other issues, media coverage dwindling, and funding for research drying up. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "I want you to speak directly to the public," Evelyn replied. "Not just locally, but globally. You have a voice people trust. If you can remind them why this fight is important, maybe we can keep the momentum going." It wasn't an easy decision. Laura knew speaking on such a large scale would put her under intense scrutiny. Critics would try to discredit her, and powerful interests would likely push back. But she also knew Evelyn was right. If no one kept the pressure on, the world might forget about the crisis entirely. With Ryan's encouragement, Laura agreed to take the stage once again. She traveled to cities around the country, giving speeches and participating in panel discussions. She spoke plainly, using simple language to explain the science behind the crisis and its implications for the future. "This isn't just about us here," she told crowds of listeners. "It's about our children, our grandchildren, and everyone who comes after us. We owe it to them to leave the world better than we found it." Her words resonated deeply. People began rallying behind her message, reigniting the movement that had started in Oak Ridge. Social media campaigns spread awareness, petitions gathered, millions of signatures and protests erupted in major capitals worldwide. For the first time in months, it felt like real change might be possible. Back home, however, things weren't so hopeful. Ryan's condition worsened rapidly, forcing him to spend most of his time in bed. Laura stayed by his side as much as she could, reading to him, holding his hand and sharing stories of the people they'd helped along the way. One evening, as they watched the sunset through the window, Ryan turned to her. "You've done everything I could have asked for," he said softly. "And more. Don't stop now, okay? Promise me." Tears streamed down Laura's face, but she nodded. "I promise." A few weeks later, Ryan passed away peacefully in his sleep. The loss hit Laura hard, leaving her hollow and unsure of how to move forward. Friends and neighbors rallied around her, offering comfort and support, but nothing could fill the void Ryan left behind. Still, she clung to the promise she'd made to keep fighting for a better future. In the weeks that followed, Laura channeled her grief into action. She adopted Emma's son Tommy after Emma tragically succumbed to complications from the crisis. Taking care of the boy gave Laura a renewed sense of purpose. He reminded her of the stakes, the lives depending on humanity's ability to heal itself and the planet. Meanwhile, scientific breakthroughs began to emerge. Researchers discovered ways to modify the neutralizer, making it more effective at reversing some of the damage. Advances in genetic engineering offered the possibility of repairing corrupted DNA, though these techniques were still experimental and far from widespread use. Every step forward was small, but together, they added up to meaningful progress. Autumn returned to Oak Ridge, bringing crisp air and golden leaves. The town hosted a celebration to mark how far they'd come. People gathered in the park, sharing food, music, and laughter. Children played tag, their giggles echoing through the trees. At the center of it all stood the new laboratory, bustling with activity as scientists worked tirelessly to find answers. Laura addressed the crowd, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside her. "We've faced challenges none of us could have imagined," she said. "But look at what we've built. A community that cares, a world that refuses to give up. This isn't the end of our journey, but it's proof that even in the darkest times, light can shine through. Her words earned applause, cheers, and tears. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the park, Laura felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself but for everyone standing there. Humanity was flawed, yes, but it was also resilient. Together they had faced the unimaginable, and together they would continue to rebuild. Later that night, as she tucked Tommy into bed, Laura allowed herself a moment of quiet gratitude. The road ahead would still be difficult, full of unknowns and obstacles, but for now, surrounded by the love and determination of those around her, she believed they could face whatever came next.